Welcome into the college basketball closing line show for Saturday, hitting a bunch of the games. It's February 9th, Saturday, alongside Ian Cameron. I'm Drew Martin. We got a full slate here, Ian, and welcome into the show. How you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing good, Drew, on a Saturday. How can I not? It's a college basketball slate that is a loaded one as always, plus a little hockey too, which I'm into as well. So it's always fun on a Saturday at this time of year. Lots to sink your teeth into from a betting perspective. Let's get her going.
Let's get it going, man. We got, about 10 noon games here off the top. One of the big ones, ranked in the Big Ten, Wisconsin, Michigan, 120.5 the total. Seeing a low total here at SBR odds. Michigan, the Wolverines laying 6.5 or 7 at home. Looking at this quickly, Ian, I haven't bet it yet, but we got Wisconsin, a slow-paced team, in the 300s as far as offensive pace, versus Michigan. They're not going to really push it either. A bottom 250 team in terms of pace. Both teams going to concentrate on defense. I did notice, however, Ian, looking at this total, I'm leaning under. Both of these teams struggling from the free throw line, under 70%, 66 and 68% respectively for Wisconsin and Michigan. I like the under, haven't bet it yet. Wanted to see your thoughts. How are you looking to bet the Wolverines and Badgers?
From a spot perspective, Drew, it certainly sets up for Michigan. I mean, you look at it, they lost their first game of the season to the Wisconsin Badgers in Madison earlier in the season. One of their very bad game for them from an offensive perspective. They get beat by the Badgers. Now they're in revenge mode, and same season revenge. That's an angle I certainly take into consideration, but you can't bet it blindly. I've still got to factor in matchups and where the point spread is. And, I had Michigan. I was looking at them maybe in the 4 or 5 range. I'd be interested in the Michigan side. It opened 5.5, and it's been bet up since then, Drew. 6.5, 7 now. I think it's just a little bit too high now for me to get involved with Michigan. It's Michigan or pass. I don't want Wisconsin here in this game. But, the concern, too, with laying now 6.5, 7 with Michigan, it's as you stated, where's the pace going to be in this game? It's going to be a slow pace. These are two defensive-minded teams. And from a Michigan standpoint, offense has been a little bit harder to come by in Big Ten conference season. In the non-conference, I thought their offense was a little more fluid. They were shooting better. Maybe teams weren't quite as familiar with facing that John Beilein type of system as the Big Ten is. And I think that's sort of affected them as well. So they're still a very good defensive team. I like a lot of what I see from Michigan. I've liked John Beilein from always. I mean, I've backed him a lot, especially in the tournament, the NCAA tournament. He's been a great coach at that time of year. But Michigan still has these scoring woes at times, and that can be a bit of a concern. And one thing about Wisconsin, slow start to the season, very erratic. Even early in Big Ten play, they started out slow, starting to put some things together and win some games, beat some decent teams, coming off a nice road win against Minnesota. That's another concern, too, with this spot for Wisconsin. They were in Minnesota Thursday night. You're on the road again here for an early Saturday game in Ann Arbor against Michigan. So it is a little bit of a more negative scheduling spot here for Wisconsin than you normally see for teams, especially here in the Big Ten. So again, I had Michigan circled, Drew. I was looking to bet Michigan, just didn't get the number I wanted. 6.5, 7 is just a little too rich for me.
And Ian, what makes you look to bet Michigan? Because 21-2, it's a sexy record. But when you go down and who have they beat? I mean, Villanova, that was a long time ago. Other than that, Ohio State, they have question marks. Even Indiana, I believe, was banged up at that time in the season. I just don't see a lot of quality wins from this Michigan program. I mean, obviously, they're putting themselves in position to be a tournament team, a top 10 ranked team even. But I almost kind of bucked that trend of putting them in the top 10. I'm not so sure that this Michigan team has earned it. How do you feel?
Well, it's been a lot tougher sledding for Michigan, certainly in Big Ten conference play. And in terms of quality wins, there's not a slew of them. But to me, Wisconsin, this is going to really prove something about Wisconsin. They did beat Michigan the first time in Madison. I give them credit. They've been beaten some decent teams. Minnesota, decent team. Now you got to go on the road, and Michigan not going to take you. Not that they took them lightly the first time, but Michigan's really going to come into this game focused, knowing they've already dropped one game to Wisconsin. Wisconsin's got this. It's like polar opposites. They're similar teams, I should say. Mirror images is what I'm looking to say. Wisconsin, decent defensively, Michigan good defensively. Both teams have these scoring droughts. It's really which team is going to make their shots. You hate to be that easy and simplistic about it, but it's really the case with these two teams. Hap's got to be big inside. Demetric Trice got to be good for Wisconsin. And outside of that, Wisconsin can be a little bit shaky. Who do you trust? Who's that third option for the Badgers? That's a little bit of an issue for them. Even Michigan at times falls into that trap just a little bit. So I just favor the spot here. It's avenging a previous loss. They're at home. Wisconsin's playing a second road game in 3 days. I think there's enough factors, even though you're right, strength of schedule, quality wins. Michigan needs it'd be nice to see Michigan get a couple more of those. But I think from a scheduling perspective and a spot perspective, it's a decent one for Michigan here.
All right, good stuff, Ian. And you can follow Ian on Twitter at Babano. Great follow there. Myself on Twitter at Drew Martin Bets. Hitting the chat box here, Ian. We got good BK Capper. What's up, man? Mikey D. Sup, guys? Jake, Allen, James, DMX, welcome in. Rick Baker. A bunch of guys in here, Ian. Excited to cap these games. Feel free to throw out what you guys are looking at. Seeing a quote here from DMX, Ian. 2-team teaser, Michigan and Duke. You already mentioned you were looking towards Michigan. We'll get to Duke later, but how do you feel about betting teasers in college basketball?
I don't do them. I don't recommend them either. But if you want to do it, to each his own. I can't tell you how to spend your bankroll money, or wager with it. If you want to do teasers, that's fine. It's just not, to me, the kind of thing I like to do. I think there's a little bit more of a discrepancy. I think lines are not quite as tight in college basketball as they are in NFL, which is why I think teasers make more sense in that sport than it does in college basketball. You get a little more randomness too in the college basketball results, which can totally offshoot and offset and put you behind the 8 ball in terms of betting a teaser. So I don't do it and I don't recommend it. But hey, if you like them, and hey, if you're having success with them, more power to you. Keep it up. But it's just something that's not for me.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of what Ian said, a sport like the NFL has less volatility. The number tends to fall if it's -3 more times than not, compared to a college basketball team closer to that 3 number, where college basketball, it can be a little bit more volatile, kind of like small conference college football, where teasers tend to have a little less value. A lot of that is priced in the market, but in my opinion, a lot of it isn't. I'm more of a straight bet kind of guy. One bet on a side, one bet on a total. Ian, do you ever veer off of those 2 bets that I just said?
Not often. Not often. It's pretty much the straight and narrow that we go through, just the normal type of wagers really in college basketball. One mention about the Wisconsin-Michigan total. You're going to notice if you got an odds screen up, which I do always when I'm doing shows, I've got the odds screen in the background. Total's getting hammered up right now. Way it open. Don't be scared of that if you like the under in this game, because people just hammer these low totals over the total. It's almost like a knee-jerk reaction. We're going to mechanically take over a 118 or a 119 or a 120, these low numbers, and we're going to try to see if we can get this game over a very low total simply because they think the number's too low. So that is why you see a lot of these lower line totals move up the way they do. It's not so much that you're wrong or you're incorrect or in your assessment of the game. It's just a mechanical thought process that I find a lot of college basketball bettors have. And hey, this total's 116. That's too low of a total. Let's bet the over. I think that's really what it is more than anything else.
Great catch there, Ian. Guys, just in the last 10 minutes at Bookmaker, this has gone from 120.5 at 11 a.m., right about when we started the show. Now we're seeing 124s. That's a hell of a move, Ian. 10 minutes, 4-point move. That's a whole lot of money there, man.
It sure is. I mean, it is. Now, to me, you just wait it out. You see if it'll keep going higher, and then you look under. But I find, in terms of injury situations here, I'm looking. I don't see anything. I don't see any late-breaking injury news that has come out here in this particular game at this point in time. So I think it's just opinion more than anything else here with this total going up as high as it is. So if you like the under, hopefully haven't bet it yet. And if you haven't bet it yet and you do like the under, you're going to get a pretty good number when it's all said and done.
All right, Ian. We got Anthony in the chat box saying, hey, guys, listen, I don't comment my plays all the time, but this one is too good. LSU at home, -2, max bet for me. He's saying great show as well. Anthony, thanks for chiming in. He's going with the Tigers here, Ian. We'll hit that game in the SEC in just a little bit, guys.
Tigers versus Tigers in that game. Should be good.
Exactly. It's the War Eagles Tigers versus the Go Tigers, and Go, of course, not spelled G-O. But Ian, another 12 o'clock game here. Miami, North Carolina in the ACC, 155 the total. Tar Heels laying 16 at home. I'm not scared to go against Miami. I've done it a bunch of times. I have lost a couple times with it, but no way I'm betting this Hurricanes team. They're rotating 7 guys in. We're getting deep into ACC scheduling. I wouldn't be scared of this number. How do you feel, Hurricanes Tar Heels?
Well, they did beat the brakes off Notre Dame in their last game, but I don't know if that's more of a sign of how wretched Notre Dame has fallen or how improved in one game maybe at Miami is. I don't know. I don't think you can make a big deal of that. Notre Dame's really fallen apart, really fallen on hard times. With Pfluger out for most of the season, that's hurt them. They just haven't, TJ Gibbs, their guard as well, has shot the ball terribly for Notre Dame this year. I don't know what's happened to his shot-making ability, but it's totally disappeared on the guy, and he's a guy that was expected to be big for Notre Dame this year. But anyway, that team's in a world of hurt. I don't know if you can overreact too much to Miami beating them pretty soundly the other night. They're going to get a test here. Look, I made the mistake of fading North Carolina their last game against NC State. It was just one of those handicapping 101 thoughts where, you got NC State coming off the worst scoring output in college basketball history, worst field goal percentage, I believe, in ACC history, the game against Virginia Tech last weekend. Remember that one, Drew? It's got held to 24 points in that game, NC State against Virginia Tech. I thought, hey, they had a chance to bounce back. They've been able to play North Carolina a little bit tough, but they got blown out. I mean, it was total domination from North Carolina start to finish against NC State earlier this week. And North Carolina's playing great right now. There's no denying that. They've had multiple convincing blowout wins in a row. NC State, Georgia Tech. I mean, there has been one convincing W after another. Virginia Tech, one convincing W after another for Roy Williams' team. Playing good basketball. Cameron Johnson, Luke May. I mean, they're getting great inside-outside balance. They're playing some D for a little bit. They're never going to be great defensively, North Carolina, but they're playing some defense. Some defense may be all that's required to shut down this putrid, non-existent Miami team because their offense and their scoring is terrible. You look at all their offensive efficiency numbers. Doesn't matter if you use the Bart Torvik website. Doesn't matter if you use Ken Palm website. You're all going to see the same thing. Terrible offensive efficiency numbers for Miami. You got to be able to trust the dog to score, especially when North Carolina's at home. They're going to be able to put the ball in the basket. Is Miami going to be able to match them? I know it's a big number, but I don't trust them. And I took my lumps betting against North Carolina the other night. I'm in no rush to do it again. It's favorite or pass for me.
And Ian, you bring up another team in the ACC, Virginia Tech, in your analysis. They're at Clemson, 128 the total. Virginia Tech, I mean, I believe a top 10 team, if not right outside the top 10, and they're catching 2.5 right now in Clemson. Clemson's had their ups and downs. So you got any opinion on this one?
This is a tough one. Virginia Tech's bet against material until further notice for me, until Justin Robinson gets back. That is a big-time injury for them. They've looked totally out of sync and out of sorts at the offensive end of the court in 2 games without him. The NC State game, they won that game only because NC State couldn't make a shot, and then finally caught up to them against Louisville on Monday night. They lost that game at home, and I cashed with Louisville actually in that game. Virginia Tech, bad offensively, and they rely a little bit too much on Alexander Walker, my good old Canadian friend, who's a great player for that Virginia Tech team. But they have to rely on him too much. And Justin Robinson was a big part of what made the other guys go on Buzz Williams' Hokies team. So they're out of sync right now. I don't want to back them, especially here going on the road now. A team that has really, really struggled without, their second leading scorer, Justin Robinson, and arguably their best player because of how he can facilitate this team at the offensive end of the court. But on the flip side, I don't like this Clemson team a whole. They're playing better, okay. They've notched a couple of wins in a row, but not impressive opponents. You beat up on Pitt, big deal. Georgia Tech, big deal. And again, Brad Brownell is not one of my favorite coaches in this conference. Clemson should win this game. Clemson should cover this number. Virginia Tech is hurting big time without Justin Robinson, but I got a gut feel in the pit of my stomach saying, if there's one team that could screw this up, Clemson could. That's just what Clemson sometimes is. They're a team that you can't trust in games they should win. They should take care of business here because Virginia Tech really does look out of sync. They've looked downright awful, the Hokies offensively, the 2 games without Robinson. I don't want Virginia Tech. I would take Clemson if I had to, but I don't have a whole lot of faith in them. I got to be honest.
Are you pointing towards the fact Clemson might be doing some Clemsoning?
Yeah, well, Clemsoning in football is good, Drew. Clemsoning in football means in the clutch, you get the job done. When the lights are shining the brightest, you play your best. That's what Clemsoning is in the football standpoint. In the basketball standpoint, it's, put the noose around your neck and go. That's what Clemsoning is in basketball. Maybe they do that again today.
Ian, we got our friend Michael asking St. John's game next, please. It is a 12 o'clock game. We got Providence at St. John's. St. John's, there's been a lot of headlines with St. John's, especially in the coaching circles. -6 now, open -7. So Providence taking some money. Providence was a little bit of an under trender in the beginning of the season. I kind of jumped off that train and really haven't been involved with them for the last month and a half or two. 146 the total. St. John's -6, -6.5 at home. Do you have any quick opinions here?
St. John's, how about that? Get off the mat, and a couple of nice wins in a row. I mean, they pummel Creighton on the road. They have the huge upset win against Marquette, earlier this week. I mean, let's give Chris Mullen's team credit. You got players. You have talent on this St. John's team. When you have a great guard like Shamari Pons, you can win any game. When you have a big man that can make an impact like Mustafa Heron, you can win basketball games. This is a talented St. John's basketball team, and they've sort of underachieved for most of the Big East season so far, Drew. But I think maybe signs of them percolating just a little bit here. A nice couple of wins in a row. It was a huge win for them getting that against Marquette. But I pumped the brakes just a little bit because St. John's laying points is not something I like doing. I like them in the pick'em range and the underdog range, catching points. I don't know if I'm ready to trust them laying points. It's still a team that struggled at the defensive end of the court. Ed Cooley, long-term with Providence, has been a good coach to back, a good team to back in the underdog role. Providence has really thrived when catching points. They weren't exactly sharp the other night against Georgetown, but I don't fault them for that. I think Georgetown's becoming a really, really good basketball team before our eyes right now. Georgetown, I think, improving with every game they play offensively. I know they're defensively a little bit suspect, but they can score. And obviously, Providence had trouble with them the other night. They're going to be tested by the St. John's team. There's no question. Again, St. John's, I'm not willing to step in front of them, but and Providence, for all the good they've been, Drew, in the underdog role, I should point out this is not quite the same Providence team we've seen in years past, with the Chris Dunns of the world on the team that we've seen in past seasons. I don't think they're quite as good this season. I like the way St. John's is going. I don't want to step in front of St. John's right now, but laying 6 with St. John's, not the point spread profile that long term, it's not the point spread profile that this team's been successful in, laying significant points. So it's a pass for me. I think St. John's wins, just a question of do they cover. Yeah,
can they win by margin is the question. I agree with you, Ian. We should probably open it up here. We got Andreas asking, did we touch on Georgetown Butler already? No, we haven't, Andreas. But we do have some other 12 o'clock games. Is there any others that you wanted to touch on here, Ian, before we move down the card?
Yeah, we'll touch on that one for sure because it is my only noon Eastern bet that I've made so far. I laid the 2 with Georgetown. Actually, a money line I took. Usually with the 2-point favorite or less, I'll just bite the bullet, a few extra cents, and go money line instead. About $1.35 I got with Georgetown on the money line. $1.40 actually is what I got with them there. Even -2 if you want to lay that instead, that's fine. It's your prerogative. But I think Georgetown beats Butler. Butler is not a great Butler team this year. It's Kamar Baldwin and not much else offensively. It's a very, very sketchy defensive team that's been even worse in terms of their defensive efficiency numbers on the road. In fact, this whole Big East Conference, you throw every team into a pot outside of Villanova and Marquette, and it's like, can anybody in this conference win a road game of significance? And it's very difficult for these teams to do that. I think the only one that's done it recently was St. John's when they beat Marquette the other night. But other than that, road wins for the teams in this conference have been very difficult to come by. I don't think it's one of the better teams that Butler's had in recent seasons. I don't think their coach is particularly as good as some of the coaches they've had as well in years past, Holtman, and of course going way back to Brad Stevens. So I think coaching's not quite where it's been as well in past seasons for Butler. And Georgetown's peaking right now. They're playing really good. They gave Villanova everything they could handle last weekend. Don't be fooled by that final score. The Villanova game last weekend, that was a 12-point margin of victory. That game was like tied with about 3.5 minutes to go, and Villanova just pulled away late. Patrick Ewing's got some things going on. He's got Mac McClung back. He's healthy again. Aquino, the guard, is fantastic. Freshman guard, can shoot the ball, makes his free throws, and of course Jesse Govan, tremendous player for Georgetown. Love this team a lot. I've backed them a lot, and I'm going to try backing them again today. I think they're better than Georgetown, or I think they're better than Butler, and I think Georgetown gets the win.
Ian, you're up there in Hamilton, in Canada. I'm down here in Costa Rica, so neither of us are in the U.S. of A., but we're covering college basketball, hopefully doing it well. Ian, how many Canadian college teams are there playing Division I basketball?
Yeah, and Canadian players? Yeah,
players or teams.
Players in Division I, there's upwards of 100, believe it or not. If you comb through all the colleges, whether it's starters, reserves, recruits that haven't gotten it on the floor yet, and actually I just heard this a couple of weeks ago. I think it's close to 100 Canadians in NCAA basketball right now. So again, there's prominent ones. Brandon Clark, Gonzaga, tremendous player. He's Canadian. Alexander Walker at Virginia Tech, a phenomenal player for them. There's a good group of Canadians right now in college basketball, and I think it's just a tip of the iceberg. And how about Mariel Shayok, my guy who makes a huge shot for Iowa State the other night? Used to play at Virginia, now he's at Iowa State. Mariel Shayok, another good Canadian basketball player in the college ranks right now. So there's a lot of good Canadians starting to play college basketball, and it's a great thing to see. And it's why I think Canada's finally going to be playing in the Summer Olympics basketball tournament next year. I think they're finally going to qualify for it. They're going to finally have a team that's good enough to qualify for it. And if they get in, a team that might be able to make a little noise in the Olympic tournament too. So good things, and the arrow pointing up for development of basketball here in this country.
And Ian, does Canada have their own college basketball or no?
Oh yeah, they do. They've got Canadian University basketball. Carleton's always a great team. University of Ottawa, the UBC. There's always these powerhouse Canadian universities. Simon Fraser in British Columbia is usually a very good basketball team. And sometimes these teams will actually play, American college basketball teams, Division I college basketball teams. Look at Duke. Duke was invited to play a slew of these teams, these Canadian university teams last summer. Coach K wanted to get his freshman group, R.J. Barrett, Zion Williamson, and company, to get some court time against a real live opponent before the season started in order to get his team ready for the season. So again, it's something Duke's done. There's been some other teams that have played a Canadian university team in the preseason exhibition before the season. So they do that to get themselves, not only get their players, some chemistry and continuity, but they feel they can be adequately tested by some of these Canadian basketball teams who are actually not too bad. Obviously they're still going to be in tough when you're playing Division I college team from the States, but it's not, a complete, exhibition where you could just run over them and win dominantly. So it's a good test for them, and it's Canadian university basketball definitely alive and well here.
And we got Nasty jumping in. What's up, man? Carleton beats a lot of the American teams, Ryan says. I do remember Gabe saying that. They are a program up there. We got Johnny Moses chiming in. Kentucky, Mississippi State over. Johnny, I would not be betting Kentucky overs. I just think that their on-ball defense is great behind Higgins. It's a 1 o'clock tip here, Ian. We can start opening it up a little bit lower on the card. At Mississippi State scares me a little bit. Just still seeing a number of 3.5 or 4. I'm not looking to step in front of this Kentucky train, Ian. I think they're coming on. They're just playing very good basketball. They're talented. Calipari's got this group playing well. They are going on the road in Starkville. Worries me a little bit. This is Kentucky or pass for me. Would you look to take 3.5 with Kentucky? Or you can bet the board, shop around, and find a 4 with Mississippi State. How would you look to bet Bulldogs and Wildcats?
I'm kind of with you there. I don't want to bet against Kentucky. I do respect Mississippi State at home. That home court's very good in Starkville for Ben Howland's team. They've been good on that floor. Maybe maybe it's Kentucky's that do factor for a clunker, but that's the only thing I can go on in terms of why I'd want to back Mississippi State here. Is that Kentucky's got to have a bad game at some point. They can't keep this up forever. But until I see it, I'm not going to bet for it to happen. And right now, Kentucky is playing tremendous at the defensive end of the court. They're all the way up to 8th in the country defensive efficiency. They've been absolutely suffocating opponents. They've been able to shut down every recent opponent they've played. Quindary Weatherspoon, certainly, Eric Holman, guys like that, going to be really, really a good test for Kentucky here in this game. They could flat out score the ball for the Bulldogs, but is Mississippi State ready to handle Kentucky's level of defense the way they've played so far? It's one of those games where Mississippi State's going to want to get transition baskets, get this pace quickened up a little bit. Kentucky playing defense. They don't. The Kentucky's certainly a better half-court offensive team. So this is one of those games where if Kentucky wins, probably a lower scoring game. Mississippi State wins or covers, probably a higher scoring game. You probably got a nice little correlated side total type of game here. Kentucky probably correlates with under, Mississippi State with over.
Another SEC game here, Ian. We got Ole Miss, Georgia. I know you know a lot about both of these teams. We got the Rebels getting away from the pavilion. Scares me a little bit, but laying 3 on the road. This Georgia team's had their ups and downs. Not a team I've been really in action in at all. Wouldn't necessarily look to bet on them. 152.5 the total. What do you got, Rebels and Bulldogs?
There we go. Just had to unmute. Fresno and UNLV. I'm telling you what. Oh, Mississippi State, Georgia. They're Rebels and Bulldogs too. There's 2 Rebels and Bulldogs, Fresno and UNLV, and you're talking about Mississippi and Georgia over the total in that game. Mississippi and Georgia. Georgia's not playing any defense right now. Tom Crean is, how he paces up and down the sideline. We've talked about that ad nauseum. That's what he does. Tom Crean. He just wears a hole in that sideline, going back and forth all game. Well, he's doing it now because nobody's contesting shots. Nobody's getting a body on anybody in the paint. Nobody's guarding the three-point line. Nobody is really standing out or doing something defensively to help this team get stops. That's a problem. Like, Georgia's been shredded repeatedly at the defensive end of the basketball court in recent games. Why can't Ole Miss do the same? I know it's in Georgia. It's in Athens there, but Georgia's not playing much defense. Ole Miss can score. Ole Miss, those had their problems defensively too. I mean, you look at Ole Miss recently, Texas A&M earlier this week. Do you consider Texas A&M a great fluid offensive team? I don't. Still got into the high 70s against Ole Miss. So that's a little bit of a concern for me here with Ole Miss, the way they're defending at this point in time. I've been on a bunch of games involving Georgia this year over the total. This one's in that low 150s range. I think it's doable. I like that game over the total.
Ian, in this time slot, there's a game that I really like, Michigan State, Minnesota. And I've been on the Spartans train of betting them under the total. Last 2 games it hasn't cashed, but before that, I believe it was 6 of 8, something of that nature. They just haven't been pushing the ball up and down. I think they're the more talented team and will control pace against the Gophers. The Gophers haven't necessarily been a scoring machine by any means. They've had a couple games go under the total as well. You got anything in this Big Ten matchup, Michigan State, Minnesota?
Really tricky because for Michigan State, they got issues right now. I mean, we were talking about Michigan State but maybe barely 2 weeks ago as who's going to stop this team. They look like nobody can beat them right now. And now all of a sudden, the roof's caved in a little bit on them. Lose to Purdue. Okay, the loss to Purdue I could see coming. Purdue at home. They lost to Michigan State earlier this season. It was a tough spot for Michigan State on the road for a second game in 3 days, kind of like what we talked about with Wisconsin, what they're going through today. Michigan State was in that spot against Purdue. Purdue, a very good team, especially at home. They lost that game. No shame in that. There's a little bit of shame in losing to Indiana in overtime at home in East Lansing after that. There's even a little bit of shame losing to Illinois earlier this week the way they did. And, hey, Michigan State, why does Illinois win games? With Brad Underwood there, the style he plays, they probably win games because you didn't take care of the basketball, because they force turnovers. It's the style they play, and Michigan State turned the ball over endlessly in that game. Double digits in turnovers, not good enough. Can't beat a team that plays the style, the pressure style, force turnovers, kind of full court style that Illinois does. And Michigan State and Illinois played them like a fiddle. Michigan State played right into that in that loss to Illinois. So now they've got some legitimate confidence issues right now. 3 games in a row they've lost. We know they've had without Langford for such a long period of time. It's a team that struggled. Now all of a sudden, turnovers defensively not quite as sharp. Offensively, they've regressed a little bit as well, even though we know they've got shooters all over the court. McQuaid, of course, Cassius Winston running the team offensively. But it's been sometimes you got to use gut intuition and gut feel. Gut feel tells me Michigan State wakes up today. And they bring it. I don't know why. And Minnesota is certainly not a pushover. But Minnesota's also had some ugly road losses. Minnesota's also had some games where they've gone on the road and not handled it well. In fact, Minnesota lost to that Illinois team on the road earlier this Big Ten season, and they got their doors blown off by that Illinois team. So Minnesota's not quite one of those teams I trust here, especially if Michigan State flips the switch. And that's what you're betting. If you're betting this game, it's a really, really tough game, in my opinion. But if you're betting this game, you're betting on, is Michigan flipping the switch today? Or are they going to stay in the same malaise and the same funk they've been in for the last 3 games? If they flip the switch, they probably blow out Minnesota. If they don't flip the switch, Minnesota's live in this game. I think they do flip the switch, though, so I'm leaning Sparty.
Liking Sparty. So am I sidewise. We got Tomar in here saying the Langford injury is showing now with Winston wearing down. And Tomar, I mean, that's a great point, and that's why I've really been betting Michigan State under the total. Last 2 times didn't cash, but when Langford went out, finding change, I talk about it all the time, is a great way to win in sports betting, because with that change, the odds makers don't have as much data behind it to put out numbers. When Langford went out, read an article, they weren't going to push the pace as much, and sure enough, they were an under trender after that. So I agree with you. Great point there, Tomar. Ian, anything else you want to throw out, kind of 1-2 o'clock range? I know we got Auburn, LSU. We had people in the chat box saying LSU -2 was the side. Do you have anything here? Tigers and Tigers?
Tigers and Tigers, yes. Yeah, I like LSU a lot. In fact, I like LSU in this game here at home. You're an Auburn guy. You got to be concerned with what Auburn has done away from their home court. I mean, their road performances, they've got to get better. Hell, South Carolina beat Auburn when Auburn went on the road. Auburn's got to play better on the road, and until I see them play better on the road, talent-wise, they can match LSU, but they've got issues putting it together and playing good basketball away from Auburn. That's a concern here. LSU, just keeps on finding ways to get the job done, really. They've been absolutely outstanding. They've been phenomenal, especially at home. I like Tremont Waters. He is a great player. They've got some guys that can hit the 3. They've got inside-outside balance. Will Wade's team, that pressure style, again, another team that likes to get transition opportunities, quicken the pace, get in the open floor, and that's the way LSU plays. Auburn likes playing that way. Auburn really relies on perimeter shooting. LSU defensively a little lackluster at times, but when it comes down to it, it's LSU at home. It's Auburn's not proven enough to me on the road. And I think LSU defensively, yes, they've come and gone, but they have better defensive numbers at home than on the road, and Auburn's defensive numbers just have been really poor at times on the road this season. So I'm going to go to LSU here. You can only lay 2.5. It's a cheap number. I think LSU gets the win, gets the cover. I also like the total to go over. It's a high number, but I've been on LSU overs a ton, and I think I've cashed all but 1 or 2 of them since SEC play began. It's just a high-scoring team that just get the pace going. It's an up-and-down game. Auburn's going to play that way under Bruce Pearl as well. 159.5. I know it's high. You got to get 160s to cash your ticket, but I could see an 84-80 kind of game, 86-83, something like that. I think both teams can get 80s here, and we get over the total. So I like LSU and over in that game.
I don't disagree with you, Ian. And yeah, you bring up the fact, I'm an Auburn guy, graduated from there. I mean, I'm a fan of Auburn, wearing the shirt and everything. But breaking down this Auburn team, you brought up a bunch of good points. I mean, if Auburn's shooting lights out, they're a tough matchup. I wouldn't want to be playing them in the tournament at all. However, you brought up the point, they're 1-4 on the road. I think that has something to do with their shooting woes. And I've tried to put this into kind of my handicap and in general, 3-point shooting teams that don't shoot good on the road. I think there's correlation there going forward. And I think Auburn kind of falls into that camp. I would not look to be on Auburn here. I haven't pulled the trigger against them. But it's just something that kind of keeps me off of this game, more of just going to watch as a fan. But, yeah, you bring up some points there as far as Auburn being a good shooting team. But if they're not shooting well, we've seen it a lot. They lost to South Carolina, NC State, Mississippi, all on the road. And to tell you the truth, in most of those games, they weren't really competitive. And a lot of those games, they lost by double digits as the favorite, which is kind of a scary scenario, though. There we got 2 other ranked teams here in this time slot, just about in the 2 o'clock. Villanova, Marquette. You know a lot about these 2 teams as well. 145.5 the total. Ian, seeing Marquette -2, some -2.5s out there at SBR odds right now. That's at home. Villanova, Marquette. What do you got?
Wow. Two great teams. I love both teams. I don't want to bet against either of these teams. Don't make me bet against one of these teams, and I'm not going to bet against one of these teams today. I like them both. Villanova's really playing great right now. It's very hard to step in front of them, but I know Marquette finally had a slip up, a loss that, if you ask them bluntly, they're going to feel, we shouldn't have lost that game, even though St. John's, as I said, does have some talent, but you'd like to think you can beat them at home. Didn't happen. Maybe you'll look ahead to this game a little bit for Steve Wojciechowski's team going into this game here against Villanova. But, I'm not selling Marquette short either. And Villanova this is going to be the best team they've played in a very long time. Let's see how they handle it. They barely escaped Creighton. They barely escaped Georgetown. There have been some close calls on this Villanova run that they've been on. I think Marquette's got a chance today. Gun to the head, I'd lean to them, but I'm not betting against Villanova with the run they've gone on. I like the over in this game more than anything else. It's a mid-range total. Marquette's better defensively. I know that this year. They're much better defensively than they were last year, but they've still got the scores. I think Villanova's going to test Marquette a little bit at the offensive end, especially we're seeing Phil Booth really play. We were concerned before the season, is Phil Booth ready to be the main character for this Villanova team? He's been great in a supporting role and in a secondary role for the last couple seasons. Could he step up into that main role? He's done that extremely well. Colin Gillespie has played better with each passing game. There's a lot to like right now with Villanova right now in terms of the offensive end. So totals, I think, reasonable here. I thought it would actually come closer to the 150 range, which is where a lot of these Big East totals usually are. The fact that it's 144.5 the last I looked, 145 in that range, I think there's a little value, little wiggle room over the total.
Okay, liking the over here. Dom saying Marquette. We got Christopher saying Marquette at home, though. Guys, if you're liking the content, please give us a thumbs up sign. Also, if you could retweet, share on your social medias, that would help out as well. Trying to get as many winners as possible out there to the chat box, to the watchers. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Ian from Canada, follow him on Twitter at Babano. I'm still down here in Costa Rica. You can follow me on Twitter at Drew Martin Bets. Ian, time-wise, we're getting up against it. We got to move down the card, man. Got to get a lot out there. Huge Saturday college basketball card. A game you mentioned when we were off camera, Rutgers, Illinois in the Big Ten, 143.5 the total. Illinois seeing 6.5. That's what the Illini are laying at home. Don't tell me you're betting Rutgers, man. I know that they put together some wins here of late. What did they beat Nebraska, Indiana, but has since lost to Ohio State and Michigan back-to-back. How you looking about this one, man?
Yeah, I mean, do you really trust Illinois after the mother of all wins, though, against Michigan State? Can they do it again? I mean, is Illinois at the point now where they're mature enough, they're strong enough physically and mentally to not fall into a letdown after the kind of win they had the other night against Michigan State? I don't know, because I still don't even know if this team's all that great. They got Michigan State reeling a little bit confidence-wise. The only reason really they ran away with that game and won in the end is they forced a shit ton of turnovers. And if they're not doing that, Illinois struggles to win, let alone cover. And that's going to be the concern here. Rutgers is going to, they have been pretty decent at times in terms of that end of the basketball court. Defensively, I think they've been pretty solid of late, and they have been able to be competitive in a lot of these games. It's really tough because you've also seen games where Rutgers has been blown out on the road. Purdue, they went on the road, they got blown out in that game. But I do think Steve Peichel has got this team playing better, just incremental improvements. Rutgers basketball, believe me, it's still got a long ways to go. No question about that. But they do. Geno Baker's a decent player on this team. They got some players that can shoot the ball and get the ball through the hoop. I don't know. I've got a really queasy feeling about laying points with Illinois coming off the kind of win they had. I'd take Rutgers if I had to, but yeah, I don't have much interest in that game.
Ian, big one here, 6 o'clock time frame, and then after this we can kind of open it up to the middle of the range if you had any other games. But Duke, Virginia in the ACC, the rematch here. We got 136.5, or mostly 136 is out there in the marketplace in terms of a total. Virginia pick'em -1 at home. I thought that they might be more. A rematch of sorts in the ACC. Biggest game on the slate, number 2 ranked Duke, number 3 ranked Virginia. How would you look to bet the Cavs and Blue Devils here?
Yeah, I'm going to take Virginia here. I know that's obvious because they're the team that's trying to avenge the loss earlier this season at Cameron Indoor, but they're at home, been great on this floor, and really from a Virginia standpoint, it's a huge game for them. You lose this game, you're 0-2 head-to-head against Duke, and you give Duke the inside track basically for the ACC regular season title and the #1 seed in the ACC tournament, the #1 seed in the NCAA tournament next month. Let's be honest. I mean, if Duke wins today and sweeps Virginia, that's a big step forward to the #1 seed in the NCAA tournament, one of the 4 #1 seeds in the NCAA tournament. And for Virginia, that their #1 seed hopes take a big hit if they lose twice to Duke. So we'll have to wait and see. So it's a huge, huge game for Virginia. Not saying it isn't for Duke, but Virginia, there's a lot of things that all of a sudden, a lot of their goals may not be accomplished if you lose this game today. So not only that, but adjustments now. I mean, defensively, RJ Barrett had one of those games where he absolutely went off for the Duke Blue Devils in that first meeting against Virginia. You got to think Cavaliers, with the bread and butter of this team still being defensively, going to be able to make their adjustments. I think the pack line defense for Tony Bennett going to swarm Zion, force RJ to be as good shooting the ball as he was against Duke in Cameron Indoor. I don't think it's going to be quite as easy. I love the guy. He's Canadian. How can I not? And I think he's going to be, a little bit challenged this time around to shoot the way he did. He shot a great percentage in the first meeting. I don't think he's going to be able to do that this time around in the rematch here against Virginia. And Virginia is an improved offensive team. All right, they're not proficient and lighted up type of team, but they've got some weapons. I mean, they've got obviously Kyle Guy. You got DeAndre Hunter. Ty Jerome can chip in offensively as well. They have some people that can put the ball in the basket. I think it's a little improvement on the offensive end this year for Virginia compared to years past. You only got to lay a very short number here. Duke's a great team, not taking anything away from them, but I think Virginia gets them here in the rematch.
I agree with you. And being able to find them, what you can get -1 pretty much right now is the lowest number. Duke shooting 51% last game versus Virginia. That was, of course, at home. So I think UVA coming home, revenge spot of sorts. Not that revenge is a huge angle I'd look to bet, but I like UVA here. Their defense, one of the best in the country, and their offense, you touched on it, Ian. It's not like the UVA offenses have had. They can put the ball in the basket. It's not only a just bet Virginia under the total type of game because they are a slower paced team still. They're a lot better, more talented offensively. So I would look to take UVA here -1 if you can find it. 707, 708, Ian, in the Big 12, Kansas State, Baylor. D-Wade back has really improved Kansas State overall, 125.5 the total. Baylor, I would actually, just watching them play the last couple games, their guard play as far as it's talented, but they don't look to push the ball as much as they used to. I had Baylor kind of pegged as an under team. Also, Kansas State catching 3 here. I know it's on the road, but I look towards Kansas State in this one. How would you look to bet Kansas State Baylor?
One last point about Virginia. Ty Jerome was questionable with a back injury for this game the last I looked. In terms of a updated status, I haven't seen it. It's at this point, it's still 6 hours. That's a 6 p.m. Eastern tip-off, so maybe he's a game-time decision. Who knows? But I'm going to take Virginia regardless of whether he's in or not. Maybe you'll get a better number if it's ruled that he's out. But, obviously it would hurt not having him. There's no question about that. But again, the last I heard was questionable, so we'll see if he's able to suit up for Virginia in this game. Baylor, Texas, you got to wonder about Baylor. Incredible run. And without Tristan Clark was a big key cog in this team, got injured out for the season early in January, and yet they've picked it up. Mario Kegler, Makai Mason, the Yale transfer, has been absolutely outstanding during this run. And even without Clark, you thought Baylor was really going to hit the skids. All of a sudden, they actually go fast, Drew, what they did. After Clark got injured, they went to a smaller lineup, guard-oriented lineup, quickened the pace, believe it or not, and they had success with it. They reeled off a bunch of wins, a bunch of point spread covers in a row, but they finally hit a wall the other night against Texas. I guess they were due for a bad game. They had it, especially at the offensive end against Texas in a loss on the road the other night. Baylor, to me, a great run they had. Still a team that's dangerous. I think some regression has to happen a little bit from that run that they had, and maybe the Texas game was a sign of that. K-State, obviously they've been better with Dean Wade back. There's no question. And Kamau Stokes was out for a bit as well. That hurt this team. They're back now, healthy, and making a difference for the Wildcats here. So I'd be careful with Baylor. They had a great point spread run, a great straight up run, but have numbers caught up to them? Finally caught up to them the other night against Texas. They didn't win. They didn't cover. Broke a long, extended straight up and ATS streak they had. Maybe some value to bet against Baylor right now after that extended run of success they had ATS.
Ian, we only got about 10 minutes left. We got best bets coming up. And guys, feel free to throw out any games in the chat box. We'll hit them quick hitter style here right before best bets. But did want to throw out a couple more games. I got my eye on. I think you mentioned you did 749, 750 in Nebraska, Purdue in the Big Ten. 138 the total. Purdue getting bet up even more. 12.5 now we're seeing. This Nebraska train, no way I'm betting it. I have already bet Purdue. Looks like the market agreeing with me. It's just not wanting to catch a falling knife. This is Fade City, Nebraska. How do you feel about Nebraska, Purdue?
Yeah, there's no way I can take Nebraska right now. It's a confidence-less team. It's a lifeless team. It's a lethargic team. The heartbeat of the team is Isaac Copeland, and you can trace this dismal run for Nebraska right back to the moment he got injured and out for the season. And from that moment on, Nebraska's been an absolute disaster. Absolute disaster. Offensively, they've lost their way. Defensively, they've fallen off. Tim Miles' teams used to guard people. Tim Miles' teams used to contest shots, be physical, be tough. I'm seeing a soft, pansy Nebraska team on the court the last few days. That's a very cruel word to say. I hate using that, but we've seen the pansification of Nebraska ball since Isaac Copeland went out with that injury. They've become very, very easy to play against. Nobody gets a hand up against you at the defensive end of the court. Their offense looks stagnant. It's too much ISO basketball at times. It's just a complete and utter mess right now. Where's these other veterans on this team? Where's James Palmer? Where's Glenn Watson? Where are these guys to steady the ship and say, hey, let's keep this train on the tracks and let's look forward and let's keep this thing going. Let's not lose our confidence. Let's not say the season's over. Where are those guys to pull this team back up from the depths of hell? I'm not seeing it right now with them. It's just mentally they're weak. Physically they're weak right now. That's bad combination when you're playing Purdue, who are mentally tough, physically tough. You look at Matt Harms play the way he plays. You didn't tell me he's not physically and mentally tough. He's just grabbing every basketball he can off the backboards. He's an incredible rebounder, great post player for Purdue. Obviously, Carson Edwards, a dynamic guard, has had a great season for Matt Painter's team, and they're playing some of their best basketball right now, playing very confident, the Purdue Boilermakers right now. So, yeah, Nebraska's not giving me a reason to trust them. Obviously, we know in college basketball, these one-game situations, anything can happen. Hell, we didn't see a few weeks ago Illinois beating Maryland. And I don't think we could have seen Illinois beating Michigan State earlier this week. On a one-off game, you never know what can happen. Maybe Nebraska all of a sudden out of nowhere rises up, hangs in this game, or it even wins it, but I don't see it. I could only look to Purdue.
Ian, another game here. I know you wanted to touch on FIU, UTEP, 753, 754, 9 p.m. Eastern tip here. 150 the total. Looks like we got this Conference USA matchup. Pick'em, -1. Both sides. So this is a great one to shop around. 5 dimes showing -1 towards FIU, the Panthers. Most other books at UTEP -1 at home in El Paso. What are you looking to bet FIU, UTEP?
This is a low total for FIU. FIU is the #1 tempo team in the country. Like, this is lightning fast they play in terms of pace. And I think I'll be able to take advantage of that here with an over in this game. UTEP is not a great offensive team, but you look at their recent results in Conference USA, they've played some good defensive teams that have led to some of those, weaker scoring outputs. That's not FIU. FIU's not good defensively. They play up and down. I think UTEP's going to finally get some open looks, finally be able to hit some open shots in this game. And FIU's going to score theirs because at the tempo they play, you're always going to get a ton of possessions. You're always going to get a lot of opportunities to score and put the ball in the basket. FIU, again, as I mentioned, not great defensively. It's going to be a step down in class defensively for this UTEP minor squad, which I know has had trouble at times offensively, but I think they're going to get it going today. And again, we've seen Florida International totals routinely mid-150s, high 150s, 160s. This is very low for their standards. It's because UTEP's not great offensively. UTEP plays at a slower pace, but FIU's been able to drag a lot of teams in this conference into their pace of play. I think they can do that here. So I like over. I bet it at actually 150. It's gone up since then. So there's some agreement in the markets with me on this being a higher scoring game. So I like FIU and UTEP to go up and over the total in that game. We're going to go mining for units with the over in that game.
I like it, Ian. Mining for the units. We got Brent Michaels. Hey, man, welcome into the closing line, Brent. We got Buffalo versus Central Michigan, guys. Thanks. A couple other guys comment in Buffalo covering the 16. It is a large number here, but it's tough. It's always tough to go against Buffalo, especially in MAC play. -16, -16.5. Any quick thoughts here, Ian?
Yeah, but Buffalo's already had some hiccups. There's no question. I mean, it's especially ATS. I mean, in MAC play, they're just such a dominant team in this conference. It's not always easy to go against them, but from a point spread perspective, it's hard to find a bargain with them right now at this point in time either. But, in the case of Central Michigan, it's not a great basketball team by any stretch of the imagination. They don't do anything particularly well. And these teams that sometimes struggle defensively, that's the teams that I struggle to think can contain Buffalo's just so good scoring the basketball. So many great options. Massenberg's just a phenomenal player. They've got multiple people that can beat you on this team offensively. So I'm not looking to make a case for Central Michigan. All I'm saying is buyer beware a little bit with Buffalo. I mean, you're not getting any sort of bargains right now in the numbers with them.
Ian, follow him on Twitter @Babano. Coming to you from Hamilton, Canada. Really knows his stuff. Thanks for all the information, Ian. We got best bets here. I guess I could lead us off going to the Big 12. Kansas State, Baylor. I'm looking to take Kansas State here, Ian. Do you have it up on your screen? I just went black a little bit, but
let me get it for you. Let me see. Let me just do a search here. Kansas State will bring you the numbers. We'll give you the best number that's out there with that one. We can give you 3 with Kansas State. It's 3 across the board, 2.5, 3. So we'll give you +3 at 5 times. Kansas State. There you go.
Kansas State +3 for my best bet on today's huge Saturday basketball card. Ian, follow him on Twitter @Babano. What do you got for best bets, man?
It's funny. We talked about this game, or we haven't talked about. We talked about another Rebels versus Bulldogs. We're going to talk about the other Rebels versus Bulldogs because this is going to be my best bet for the show. Fresno State, UNLV. I'm going to lay a 1.5 with Fresno. In fact, actually, I'm going to go to the money line. I'm going to get you to put it down for me, Drew, as the money line option. Let me find the prices for that. But I like Fresno on the road against UNLV. I know UNLV got a losing streak, snapping win the other night against Boise State. This Boise State team, everyone's going to say, oh, great win for UNLV. Boise State's terrible this year. This is not the same Boise State team. This is Leon Rice's worst team, I think, in Boise in years. They don't have Anthony Dermick anymore. Marks. There were some really, really good players in Boise in years past. That's not this year's Boise team. So I don't give UNLV a ton of credit for winning that game, not by any stretch. Yeah, 125, Fresno on the money line. So you can write that one down for me, Drew. It's going to be Fresno State -125 on the money line. That's where I'm going to go with best bet against UNLV. Look at UNLV's wins. They're 6-4 in conference play. Almost all of those wins against nobodies. San Jose States, Colorado States, the weakest of the weak in the Mountain West, the majority of their conference wins. I know they're at home, but they've struggled at times against better competition at home. It's not the Thomas and Mack Center's half empty for most of these home games now for UNLV. Fresno State, playing some much better basketball. They're the much better of these teams defensively. It's not even an issue. With Marvin Menzies' team, it's we chuck up the first 3 we can find, and then nobody gets back at the other end of the court on the next possession. That's their style of basketball. That's not Fresno State's. They can play some D, and I think that's going to be the difference in the end. Just asking Fresno, who I think is the better team, to win this game, I got no problem doing that. So I like Fresno State, money line, -125 against UNLV as my best bet.
Good points there, Ian. And yeah, UNLV, it's a nice, big stadium, but if they're not good, they're not filling it. So it almost isn't a good home court advantage at that point. So like in Fresno State on the money line, -125 on the road in Las Vegas. I'm on Kansas State +3, D Wade back. I just think Kansas State is underrated the last couple games, and Baylor, a little bit on their guard play, not attacking the basket, I've noticed the last couple games. So looking to go K-State as well. Ian, any last thoughts here before we shut this down?
No, I mean, I'm just trying to see, is there any game, just quickly before we sign off, any bigger scale game that we didn't talk about? Oh, DePaul and Xavier. I did want to throw that one out there quickly. Xavier, do you know about teams that stink right now? We talk about UNLV. We talk about Boise not being good. We talk about Nebraska being awful right now. What's happened to Xavier? They've lost 5 in a row. They've been terrible lately. Travis Steele's certainly not looking like the same caliber of coach that they've had in years past with this team. When you go back and look at the last 10 to 15 years of Xavier basketball, consistently one of the best teams in their conference, consistently an NCAA tournament team, going way back to when Sean Miller was the coach of Xavier, like 10 to 15 years ago, and then the Chris Mack era. After that, always good basketball teams. That's not this year's team. They're having a tough time. They've lost 5 in a row. They've even lost to some teams that you really shouldn't be losing to. I know DePaul, no great shakes. They're they're still bottom tier team in this conference too, but it's not like Xavier's. We got to call Xavier what they are right now. They're bottom tier team in this conference. They're not very good. I know they're at home laying 4.5, but DePaul's been able to cover numbers in the road dog role. They won at St. John's. They won at Seton Hall. They've been able to win some games on the Big East Road, DePaul, earlier in conference play. And you talk about revenge meaning something. Revenge means something here. DePaul had Xavier dead to rights earlier this season on the home court. DePaul was up big, and then Xavier went on this crazy, something like a 20-5 run down the stretch and turned a loss into a win over DePaul in DePaul on their home court earlier this season. It's a loss that, from what I've seen, these Blue Demons players, they got a chip on their shoulder. They haven't forgotten it, want to avenge it. They know they've got a wounded animal here in this Xavier team that's not playing well, that's 5 in a row they've lost. They're lost their confidence, lost their swagger. I think DePaul can win that game outright, let alone get inside plus 4.5 points. So I like DePaul in that game.
Okay, liking DePaul. We also got Chris saying, Seton Hall, Creighton. Yeah, Creighton, a bunch of injuries, guard position. I would actually look under in Seton Hall, Creighton. But other than that, anything on that game, Ian?
Yeah, Seton Hall. I trust Seton Hall more than I trust Creighton. I mean, I think a little bit more at the defense. You got to give Kevin Willard a lot of credit. You know, Kevin Willard lost so many of those big-time players from last year's team that were so integral to the success of that team. Hernandez, Delgado. I mean, there's so many of those key players that are gone. Powell, thank God, he's still there for Seton Hall. But other than him, there's a lot of personnel turnover from last year's Seton Hall team to this year. And they've still managed to be pretty decent. Obviously, it's been a little bit more up and down for them lately. But when you look at Creighton, I know in terms of their abilities offensively, they're still pretty solid. But defensively, they still lack a little bit. Krempelli and Tyshawn Alexander are relied on so heavily for this Creighton team. And defensively, they still struggle. I still don't trust them on the road. Another one of these Big East teams that, can you trust them on the road? Creighton's not usually one of those teams that I like to trust on the road. So I'd lay in at 4 points as a favorite here. I would lean Seton Hall a little bit.
Ian Cameron, follow him on Twitter at Babano. You can follow me on Twitter at Drew Martin Bets. Guys, thanks for tuning in. Great show, Ian. And best of luck with your bets out there. Huge Saturday college basketball card. No need to kind of blow your load on just one bet, man. Spread it out. Don't bet too much. Only bet what you can afford to lose. And for Ian Cameron, I'm Drew Martin. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Best of luck with your bets today.
Good luck, everybody. Thanks for watching.